You mentioned at the beginning that you'd been working on this film for quite a while, so perhaps you can just tell us the origin of how this movie started to become a film.
I was young when I started. An editor, a book editor, sent me a copy of the book when it was not yet published. He had read a copy and thought he might try to buy it, but thought I might like it, that it would make a good movie, and he sent it to me, and I read it, and I immediately loved it, and I had read other writing that Jeffrey had done, and I had been a fan of his, and he was the only writer that I sent it to. Oftentimes you send things out to many different writers and try many different ideas, but I sent it just to Jeff, and he responded positively.
I was the only one who had the fire truck idea. It's going to happen every time we do the show.
And he wrote the screenplay, and we worked on it back and forth for a number of years, and had tried sort of like Cinderella, tried one director on and another actor on, and it never really stuck. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, sent it to Bill Condon, and he responded positively to it and immediately said he wanted to send it to Ian McKellen. They'd been looking for something to do, and he sent it to Ian McKellen, and Ian McKellen said yes. So for 8 years, it was incredibly slow, and then it happened pretty quickly once Bill and Ian said yes. They were very busy, so I think we waited about a year for their schedules to shore up, and then we went to London and made the movie. Here we are.
Finita la commedia.
Having seen the movie, it's almost impossible to imagine anyone else in the lead role. So I'm wondering for you, since you obviously didn't know that this would be the outcome, when you were writing, did you have a visual picture of your Holmes?
Well, I think everybody has a visual picture of Holmes, and then you try to apply it to certain actors. But I know we talked about McKellen years ago, before even Bill had signed on. So certainly it's impossible to imagine anybody else now. But he's one of the few actors you can possibly imagine that both has the stature to pull off playing that kind of role. It's already iconographic, but also has all the theatrical background and the vocal qualities and the humor to play him too. Because Holmes is often described as a brain or an intellect with mere appendages. But to sell that, you have to be very likable and very funny. And I think that's one of the odd things about McKellen. He really brings you to him, even when he is playing someone who's ostensibly not terribly sympathetic.
Yeah, I agree. So for those of us who might not have read the book, maybe you can tell us, obviously the story's fantastic, but what was it about the book that grabbed you and made you think it would be a good cinematic project?
Well, I thought it was a good part. I thought it was a couple of great settings. Those are always good qualities. And I really liked its theme. To me, that idea of don't wait too long to let things close to your heart was a very good message that I found very moving. And that was really it for me. I just really fell in love with that idea. I just felt that that was an idea that I wanted to remember, and I wanted people around me to remember, and I thought it was an idea that an audience should remember, and it was that idea that really, that I fell in love with.
And for me, I'm sure a large part of it had to do with Holmes's relationship with Roger. That was, probably the anchor point for the entire book and for the film. But also the notion that in the original, in Mitch Cullen's book, he's talking about a man he's talking about many people who rewrite their own stories. Sometimes it's rewritten for entertainment. Sometimes it's rewritten as a gift. For example, I think there must be 4 iterations at the end of that story, and one of which is the true one. Another is the one that Watson writes to help Holmes or to give him a happy ending, which he doesn't like. Then there's the Hollywood version that turns it into melodrama. And then finally, Holmes himself connects it to the story of Umazaki as an excuse for why he didn't have his wits about him at the end. So I love the way that fiction works its way through fact and fact through fiction. And that was probably the most complicated thing to work out. So a lot of things in the script remained the same for years. but that central theme it reworked itself over and over and over.
Okay, do you guys have questions out there? Yes, on the aisle, far aisle over there. Yes, you in the beige jacket.
Okay. I truly appreciated the sentiment of this movie. It was very elevated to a point of elegance. So as a screenwriter, I was curious how you measure sentiment so that it doesn't become overly effusive, and how you achieve this pitch of this very elegant sentiment.
So just briefly, I won't do the whole thing, but for those in the balcony, it's about modulating sentiment so that it's not too exaggerated, but is still moving.
Personally, I despise sentiment, or sentimentality, and so I tend to be a little bit dry. And so in the writing, I don't know that it pushes in that direction. But again, so many things are about casting and directing and music and color and setting. You can be a bit drier in the way you write out a scene because you know certain actors are going to be doing it, and a certain director is going to have his approach to it. And they will add heat and light and blood to it. Sometimes if you put too many exclamation points in, then it's going to go over the top. So my default is usually restraint. And sometimes I think Bill would ask me in a rewrite to push a little bit further so the actors had a bit more to play with, frankly. But for example, there are lots of stories about old men and young people, or old women and young people. And I think the trick of the calibration here was to never make the characters ask for your sympathy, that you had to work a little bit harder, or they had to. So, for example, Roger says these terrible things to his mother, and Holmes says terrible things about people, as to other people. And I think that makes sense because those are the things that tend to push people away, which means that we, on our side, and you on your side of the audience, have to work a little harder to get back together again. So I think that's part of it, if it answers the question at all.
Thank you.
Were you present during the shooting? This seems, like the kind of film that, you're probably not going to go in and do a lot of improv on the set, but I was just wondering.
No, but there's something very interesting about that. I was only there for the last week, but at an early read-through, I was here in the States. There was something McKellen felt didn't quite work, and Bill called me and said, well, here's what we were talking about. And Ian said it this way, and he told me what he'd written down from what McKellen had said. And it was a contemporary version of, that's why I gave up my business and I moved here to the bees, and all I have is guilt and pain, and I don't know what to do with this guilt and pain. It's completely useless to me. So Bill said, can you take what Ian said, put it back through the machine, and make it sound like Holmes sounds in the rest of the script? So in effect, you are kind of saying this is an improv, but can we redigest it into the syntax and grammar of that time, which is kind of fun because actors often have a really good sense of it.
Syntax of the time, but also the syntax of the actor, right? Yeah. I think we also had, the book is called A Slight Trick of the Mind, and if you have a chance to read it, you should read it. It's quite lovely. But I do also think that because we had been working on it for a while, and even with Bill, we probably worked on it for a year again, we really knew it at the time we made it.
Did you make, I'm sorry, I didn't like you guys ask some more questions. Yes, go ahead there, like blue. It's like true, yeah.
Oh yeah, that was one of Bill's jokes. The taxidermist was me, and then one day he said, I think I saw a rush. He said, "Did you see who the taxidermist is?" I said, "No." He said, "It's Ambrose Chappell, the man who knew too much." But there's another Hitchcock reference when Mr. Calmont's at the top of the steps with the T. It's from Suspicion. So there are a couple of in-jokes there.
That whole sort of vertigo, what we used to call the vertigo sequence when she walks under the arches.
There are a few like that, yeah.
Right, we have time for a couple more. Yeah, right there. question about the bees.
Oh, the bees are all, yes, very much. In fact, most of the covers of the books you'll find in various languages, there are lots of bees. No, very much so. As you know, in Holmesian lore, Holmes is supposed to have retired to Sussex to become a beekeeper. So that's really activated in the novel, and I don't think much about the bees changed at all. Can you think of anything that we changed like that?
More like a big change.
Yes. Yes. No, we can't tell them that. No, the bees were aliens.
Okay, one more. That always scares them. Okay, I'm going to ask mine then. Oh, okay. Arm waving, ask your question. Yes, all the way in the back.
Silly question. Was there a lot of makeup involved with Mr. Holmes?
No, not at all, not one bit.
He could just do that with his face. It's amazing. There was a fair amount of makeup. The makeup guy was a terrific guy named Dave Elsey, who Bill had worked with before, who does a lot of big, huge special effects movies. And he's a big Sherlock Holmes fan. And he asked if he could come and work on the movie because he really wanted to participate in the creation of the two different time periods of Holmes and also sort of the profile. He had a strong opinion about that nose.
Can I tell the cheekbone story? So one day McKellen was taking a nap between setups, and apparently he had kind of slept on one side of his face and didn't know what he'd done, and as he came in, his cheek had shifted up like this, and I'm ready for my close-up. And so there was a lot of, and it was on a timer, right? So there was a lot of flurry of fix it, and bring his cheek back down again. It's the only time I knew that he had a fake cheek. It's great makeup.
It's a terrific story. I want to thank you both so much for coming and sharing this.
Thank you for
wonderful-
having us.